Welcome back. This next video is going to go over the worksheet called Reactions. You were asked to take a look at certain characters' reactions to certain events in chapters 25 and 26. Record their reaction and then explain what insight we gain into that character. So in other words, what do we learn about that character based on their reaction to the event? So we're going to start with Jem's reaction to Scout about to smash a bug. He tells her, "Don't do that, Scout. Set him out on the back steps." And Scout asks, "Why couldn't I mash him?" And he says, "Because they don't bother you." What does this reveal about Jem? It shows that he's mature. He doesn't want Scout to be cruel for no reason. So again, Scout says, "I never knew Jem to be cruel to animals, but I also didn't think that his charity extended to insects." So she's quite surprised that Jem has this reaction. And in fact, had it been a couple of years earlier, Jem would have probably squished the bug himself. But again, this is an example of Jem protecting innocence, cherishing innocence, not wanting to destroy something. The bug is another example of a mockingbird in this story. It's not doing anything or bothering anybody. So Jem sees that to kill it or destroy it would be a terrible thing. Helen Robinson, Helen of course is Tom's wife, her reaction to Tom's death. Now we get this through Dill. Dill is explaining to Scout what he saw. Scout said, "Dill, she just fell down in the dirt. Just fell down in the dirt like a giant with a big foot just came along and stepped on her. Just oomph." Dill's fat foot hit the ground like you'd step on an ant. So this is a really poignant comparison when Dill points out that it was like smushing a bug, because it parallels the opening of the chapter when Scout's about to smash the bug. That's what Helen Robinson looked like when she's told that her husband died. She just hits the floor. And it looks like she's been squashed by a giant. So again, it reinforces that theme of killing a mockingbird and the destruction of the innocent. It emphasizes how vulnerable Helen is. When she realizes that Tom is dead, her whole world is over. That's it. It also gives us insight into Helen because it shows us that she obviously loved him deeply and that she has big problems now. Tom was the provider for the family. So she's not only mourning his death as her husband, but now what is she going to do? How is she going to live? How is she going to take care of her family? So just like the bug's life is kind of stomped out, Helen's life is really stomped out as well when she learns of her husband's death. How do the townspeople react to Tom's death? Well, most of them talk about how typical it was. Typical of an N-word like that to run away. He had it coming. What did you expect? So they're very gossipy in nature when they're talking about it, which reveals to us that they are still racist. It is their way of justifying the verdict. They have this "I told you so" attitude. Tom Robinson, in their eyes, proved them right, even though one thing has nothing to do with the other. Tom tried to escape because he knew that he was going to be sent to the electric chair. He knew that he was going to die. He knew that he would never be found innocent. So yes, Atticus was appealing it, but he knew that no matter what jury they put him in front of, he would never be acquitted. So he does the only thing, is his only chance of living is to try to escape. But of course the townspeople don't see it that way. They think, well, what did you expect? That's exactly what we thought he would do. Mr. Underwood's reaction to Tom's death, you guys did another worksheet on this entirely, but we know that he wrote an editorial comparing it to the senseless slaughter of songbirds, again reinforcing that theme of To Kill a Mockingbird, the title of the story, the destruction of innocence. What it reveals about Mr. Underwood is that Underwood believed in Tom Robinson's innocence, and he took a stand against Maycomb's racism. Having that opinion at that time could have been dangerous, but he didn't care, and he published his opinion anyway. He spoke out anyway, which was a pretty brave thing to do. We also know that he was on Tom's side the night that the lynch mob came to the jail and tried to kill Tom. He tells Atticus, "I had your back." So Mr. Underwood is not afraid to tell the public that he thinks Tom Robinson's death was senseless. Okay, so Scout walks by the Radley house. Her reaction to walking by the Radley house is much different than it was several years ago when the book first started. She says, "It ceased to terrify me." And in fact, she says she sometimes got a twinge of remorse for taking part in what must have been sheer torment to Arthur Radley. Interesting that she also calls him Arthur and not Boo. Then she thinks about the treats in the tree. So walking past the house reminds her of the pennies and the little soap figures and the gum and all the little prizes that he left for the kids in the tree. And lastly, she still looked for him. So even though she wasn't torturing him anymore, she still had this curiosity about him. She still really wanted to see him. What does that show? It shows that she's growing up. She's looking back on her behavior as childish. She's able to see now that that probably wasn't a very nice thing to do to Boo. Jem and Scout's classmates, their reaction when they returned to school when the summer, remember the trial was during the summer, when school starts again in the fall, the children, they say, never discussed the case with Jem and Scout. Scout says it seems like they were told by their parents not to discuss it because after all, they couldn't help having Atticus for a father. They should be kind to them. Of course, that's all in Scout's head. She doesn't know that her classmates may have been told something like that by their parents, but the way that the subject is pretty much altogether avoided around Jem and Scout is pretty clear to Scout that they'd been told not to discuss that. What does that show us? What kind of insight does that provide? It shows us that the Maycomb citizens are still talking about the trial, but they did have enough respect for Atticus not to bring it up in front of his children, not to harass them for what happened over the summer, for their father's part in the trial. This last part of the worksheet was probably poorly written or poorly formatted, but Miss Gates, that's the kid's teacher, it says the event is she says that Tom got what he deserved because of his race, so that it certainly is an event, but I'm not sure. I think maybe Scout's reaction is what we're really looking for there, not Miss Gates's reaction. The event is that Miss Gates says Tom got what he deserves. The reaction is really one had by Scout, and she reacts by saying, "How can you hate Hitler so bad and then turn around and be ugly about folks right at home?" So she approaches Jem with this question. She says that her teacher told her Hitler was so bad because he was being hurtful to an entire race of people, but Scout is able to see that this is pretty hypocritical of Miss Gates because of her remark that she made about Tom Robinson. So she's smart. She's able to make connections between the two events. What's going on over in Europe at the time with Hitler and the Tom Robinson trial. In both cases, we have people being ugly to each other because of race. It's interesting and ironic that Scout, a young girl, is able to see that and make that connection, and Miss Gates is not.